A couple of years ago, I decided to make a bag with a particular shape, but I looked everywhere for a pattern and I couldn't find one. So I designed one myself. I'm Susan with Prayeriewife Quilting, and I'm here to introduce you to the Almondine Bag. And look at this beautiful shape on the bottom. It's actually an orange peel shape that you might recognize from quilt patterns. But look how elegant the curves are on this bag. And even when you set it down, the detail comes up on the side, making it really unique. And it's also really fun to make. And I'm here to walk you through the entire process of making it from start to finish. So I hope you'll join me.
Okay, before we get started, let's talk about supplies. You are going to need some contrasting fabric for your base for both the outer bag and also the lining. And I'm actually going to use the same fabric for my almond shape for both the outside and the lining. You don't have to do that. And you will also need interfacing. I use SF 101 by Pellon. It's a nice woven interfacing, and you'll need interfacing for both of those pieces. And then let's talk about fabric for the bag itself. You'll want to use something that will contrast against the base so you can really see that almond shape. And for this bag, for this sample, you can see I chose a very contrasting fabric for the base. And I also used the same fabric for the casing for the drawstring. You don't have to do that, but that's what I chose to use for this bag. You will also need interfacing for both your outer bag pieces as well as your lining pieces. I'm going to use this fabric for the outside and this one for the lining. And then for the casing, for the drawstring, that's this piece here at the top. You'll need 2 pieces for that, and these are stuck together. And you will also need interfacing. You'll need interfacing for all of these pieces. If you're using a heavy denim or something for either your base or your outer bag, you can probably skip the interfacing on that part. I don't think you'll need that. So let's go ahead and apply our interfacing, and you always want to follow your manufacturer's directions. I've got a little pad here. This was one of my vintage quilt blocks I made, oh, I don't know, 17 years ago. I'm not sure. So let's turn our almond shapes wrong side up. So we've got the right side facing down, and on interfacing, the bumpy side has the little glue spots on it. So that will go on the bottom. And by the way, I cut these with my template. And so I'm just going to place these on here. If they're a tiny bit smaller than the actual piece, that will be okay. A lot of times I'll cut my interfacing about 1/8 of an inch smaller all the way around. And I'm just going to give it a good press. And actually, I have a heat press here in my sewing room I use for doing most of my interfacing. But I wanted to demonstrate that with the iron. And I don't recommend, this is a heavy wool mat. I don't recommend doing any pressing over your cutting surface, but I think with the extra piece underneath here, I think we'll be okay. So I've got these fused on here. Let's go ahead and fuse the interfacing on the back of the casing. And again, I've got the wrong side facing up. The little bumpy side with the glue is going face down. And let's just give that a good press. Now I'm not ironing, which is that back and forth motion. I'm just kind of setting it on here. The iron will do the heavy work. It's heavy, right? And this is my Panasonic cordless that I absolutely love. It's bi-directional, so you can go either direction, and you can see it's good with the steam. And it's got a nice little base over there that I could rest that on. Okay, so we've got those interfaced, and let's interface both bag pieces. Let's do these one at a time. They're just a little bit larger than my pad to do them. So again, I've got the back of my fabric, the bumpy side down. I'm going to finish interfacing the outer bag pieces as well as the lining pieces. Okay, I think this is going to be a real fun print to work with. I love the Ruby Star fabrics, especially this Strawberry and Friends line. Okay, so now we are going to use our template again, and what we're going to do is cut the bottom of our bag in that almond shape. And this is where you'll want to decide if your fabric is directional. You'll want to make sure you're cutting the bottom of it. So this fabric actually can go either way. I don't know. We'll call these the bottoms. So I think these are a little bit easier to do sideways. So your template will have a little square on the edge that should measure 1 inch so that you can make sure that your bag is to scale. What I like to do is line up my bag piece on my cutting mat so that it's between 2 lines, because what I want to do is orient this so that it's straight. And I'm going to center it here, and then I'm going to make sure that my points are hitting the same part of the measurement, which it's not. I'm going to move it down so those are both hitting the 1/4 inch mark. So now that I know that my bottom is straight, and this little dot here is in the center, which is hitting this 1/2 inch mark. So I know that my template is in the right place. So now I'm going to shape the bottom edge of my bag, and I'm just going to carefully go like so. Your template may go over the edges a tiny bit. It's supposed to. And so again, I'm going to center this. And I'll center that at the 1/2 inch mark. And those at about the 1/4 inch mark. And then trim off that edge. Okay, see that nice curve? We like curvy. Okay, that's done. So we have all 4 of our bag pieces shaped at the bottom with our template. Okay, now we're going to prepare our casing strips, and these also have our interfacing on the back. And what we want to do is turn all the short ends under a 1/4 inch twice. And I'm going to bring my pressing pad back over here. Actually, I'm going to take them right over here to the iron and press. Okay, once I give them a little press, I'm just going to put a little clip. I'm on Team Clip. I clip unless I have to use pins. I really like the clips. And we're going to do the same with this one. We're going to fold it both under about 1/4 inch. I'm going to take it over here to the ironing surface. And I'm going to put a little clip on both ends. Now, if you want to join me over at the sewing machine, I'm just going to sew a little top stitch line about 1/8 inch to make sure I catch the folds on both ends. And so what happens when we have our casing piece, you'll have a finished edge inside, so when you're pulling your drawstrings, you won't end up fraying the fabric from the inside. So let's go over to the sewing machine. Okay, so we're just going to sew a straight line about 1/8 inch. About 1/8 to 1/4 inch, just to secure that double fold. And let's go back over to the cutting table. Okay, so now we are going to fold these wrong sides together and give it a good press. Okay, so on our finished bag here, you can see very faintly there's a stitch line here about 1/4 inch that goes across the top. And what that does is it keeps the channel below the top here, so that you get this nice little flange. And I think it just makes a nice little separator for the drawstring. So in order to achieve that, what you'll want to do, and I usually just put a little clip here on both ends. And just stitch 1/4 inch along the folded edge. Not, this is the open end. We want to stitch it along the folded edge. Okay, so when you stitch that 1/4 inch along the top, you do want to back stitch. And now what we're going to do is make 2 units. So we are going to attach, and here's another time where I want to center this. So I'm going to center this on these lines here, and I'm going to center my casing on here. And put a clip. And then I'm going to take my other bag panel and I'm going to center that between the lines. And center here and clip those. What I'm going to do now is take this over to the sewing machine and sew this casing piece on with a based stitch or a 1/8 inch from the top edge. So I've got the raw edge, the fold is down here on the casing. So I've got the raw edge, and the top of my bag that's face up. And I'm just going to stitch 1/8 inch on both of my pieces from one end of the casing to the other. And I will meet you back here. Okay, so I have both of these basted, and now what I'm going to take is my lining piece and I'm going to put these face down and line up the top edge. And I'm also going to make sure my bottom edge is lined up well. And then I'm going to clip. And I'm going to sew across the top with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to do this on both of my units. So now what we have is our top of our folded casing and our 2 bag panels. And what I want to do is let that casing lay to one side, and I want to push open my seams. And if my casing is going this way, which it is, then probably you'll want your casing seam to go that way. And I'm just going to take my iron and press that seam open, and that'll help reduce some of the bulk as we're sewing this all together, and it'll make it a little bit easier to match the seams as well. Also, what it's going to do is open this up, give that seam a good press so it's open all the way. You don't want little folds in here. So let's take my other unit, and I've got that other one going towards the lining, so we'll do this one the same, but it doesn't matter which way it goes for now. And let's open that up and give that a quick press open. Okay, our next step is we want to transfer our pattern markings onto our almond pieces. And I do that on the back side. What I'll do is take my dot and I will line it up on the mat so that it's at an intersection of 2 lines on my mat, because when I flip it up, I know that my dot is going to go right here at this intersection that I can see on my mat, but I can't see it because it's flipped up. That makes it easier for me. And we're going to do the same thing with this one. And this is a friction pen, and it will come out with an iron. Okay, so I've got my dots at both ends. Dot, see how I've got the dot at the intersection of those 2 lines? It makes it easier. I'd like to hear how you do this in the comments. If you have a different technique that works really well, I'd like you to drop a note in the comments how you do yours. In my situation, both of my bases are made from the same fabric. If you have a different fabric for your outside base, then this is where you will use it, because we're going to attach this almond to this outside base. And I'm just going to line it up along the edge at the bottom, and your points will stick over the edge a little bit. And I'm just going to clip this in place, and you see I've got right sides together. So since I've attached my outer base to my outer piece, I'm going to take my lining base, which of course these are the same, to my lining piece on my other unit. And I'm going to center it horizontally. And again, your little points will stick over the edge just a little bit. Let's go ahead and get our clips on. And then we're going to take this over to the sewing machine, and we are going to sew from the dot to the dot with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both pieces. And this is where the construction starts to get a little more fun and a little more interesting. So let's go over to the sewing machine. Okay, so I'm going to place my needle down at the dot. And we're going to use a scant 1/4 inch. And it's going to do its own little back stitch there. You don't want to back stitch past the dot. And this is a scant or just shy of a 1/4 inch seam. I'm just going to gently glide this around, no sharp turns. Let the feed dogs pull the fabric through, and I'm going to aim for this last dot. And once I get there, I'm going to do a couple back stitches
and trim this and do the same process for the other one. I'm going to put my needle down right there in the dot. And my machine does an automatic little back stitch, and then just take a scant 1/4 inch and just make a nice smooth and I'm aiming for that dot. And then once I get there, I'm just going to take a few back stitches and trim that. And let's go back over to the cutting table. This is the fun part. Okay, let's get ready for our assembly. So in order to do that, first of all, we have our outer bag and we have our lining pieces, our 2 units. And notice that there is an almond on each end. There's one on the lining and one on the outer bag. To do the final sewing construction, we need to fold the almond under and just pull it back so you've got the little end stitching right at the edge. And let's fold this one back. See, that's not flat. Needs to be flat and folded back. And so now we're going to put the outer edge to the outer edge. Let me move this in. And I want to line up these points here, or these edges here. And then I also want to line up these side seams here. Or center seams, whichever way you look at it. Okay, so I'll put some additional clips around before I take it to the sewing machine, but we need to be able to turn the bag right side out after we sew it together. So I have a 3-inch ruler, and I'm just going to mark with my friction pen on the lining side a 3-inch gap. This will be my starting sewing place, and also around the perimeter with a scant 1/4 inch and end at this place. This is a good time also to make any markings for your points on the opposite side that weren't on the original almond shape. And we will take this over to the sewing machine and sew this together. I want to back stitch it, the beginning and the end. And I am just going to aim for that dot. And once I get to the dot, I am going to pivot with my needle down. And I'm going to take that curve nice and slow. If your machine will allow you to stop with your needle down, you're going to get a much more fluid curve. And I'm just going to aim for that dot. And let's do one more stitch, and then I'm just going to pivot. And then I'll be stitching down this entire side.
There's my dot, so I'm just going to pivot. And pivot again. And now here's my 3-inch mark. I'm just going to stitch there and do a little back stitch. And let's go back to the cutting table. Okay, so I've sewn around the entire perimeter with the exception of the 3-inch opening that I back stitched around. I've got my almonds at both ends. So now we're just going to turn this right side out. Oh my gosh, look at this fun shape. Let's go ahead and push the lining in there, and it will reveal this really elegant almond shape. And so what I'll do now is I'll give this a good press around the top here so that my edges are nice and crisp, and then I will take this back to the sewing machine and do a 1/8 to a 1/4 inch top stitch around the top edge, and that will hold the lining in securely. I'm also going to take my opening, my 3-inch opening, and the way I do it is I will just turn it under and put some clips and just stitch real close to the edge there, and that will form a the closing to close that opening. Look at that elegant curve, and even when you have it setting down, the curve comes up on the side. Isn't that unique and pretty? Let's go ahead and add our drawstrings, and I use the purple thing that I got from my local quilt store, and it has a little threading hole in it. It's also great for poking out points. So I'm going to start on one end and come around here. Can you hear my kitty Jasmine? She's 16 years old and she likes a lot of attention. You can add a little bead here if you want to the end. We're just going to tie that. And then for my second, I'm going to start on the other side. Hey, Tweety. And just come around this side. And then when you tie the knots, you can also add a little bead on the end. Those are nice if you're making those for toddlers. They can grasp those little beads easier. But see how easy that was? And so now you can just grab the knots or a bead if you put that on there and pull for a nice drawstring. And that little flange that was created from that 1/4 inch seam that we made is a nice addition.
Have you thought of a couple of occasions to make an almondine bag for? I think about putting a little treat for a coworker's desk for a little surprise, maybe a little Easter basket treat, or maybe a little Halloween goodie bag. They're great for party favors and an alternative to gift wrap. And if you like to do English paper piecing, and actually I do mine on the sewing machine, this is a nice little panel rather than making a whole quilt of English paper piecing. But aren't these fun? This one is actually a cheater fabric. So I want to thank you for joining me, and please check the description for details on getting the pattern, and I'd love to see what you create. I do check all the comments, so do let me know if you make one, and I'd love to see it if you could tag me. Thanks again for joining me. We'll see you in the next video. I've got some more tutorials coming.